opening statement.
Thank you, Chair, for calling this hearing, and congrats on your new role.
Thank you.
Your history of bipartisanship and support for the maritime industry and Coast Guard will greatly benefit the subcommittee. Before we dive into the topic of the hearing, I want to address news of a few weeks ago, which was a sudden termination of Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Linda Fagan. I think what the President did was unjustified, it was reckless. Never before in the history of the service has a Commandant been relieved, let alone for political purposes. I want to thank Admiral Fagan for all that she has done for this country. Acting Commandant Lunde and the next Commandant must continue to move the Coast Guard forward, building upon the foundation Admiral Fagan built. The Coast Guard needs to continue to make significant improvement regarding sexual assault and sexual harassment. It needs to continue improvement on recruiting and retention and ensuring that the service is more inclusive for everyone. That work has to continue. It is my hope for today's hearing, that we focus on the important work of building America's maritime infrastructure, but I am concerned that that work is being undermined. The President's executive order to pause infrastructure funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act is putting billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and tens of thousands of projects at risk. While last week's broader memorandum from the Office of Management and Budget to freeze all federal assistance programs was rescinded, BIL funding, including the Port Infrastructure Development Program grants, remain in limbo. Continued threats and actions to claw back infrastructure funding are sowing chaos and will have devastating impacts on the maritime industry, national security, and economic security. Across the country, there are over 300 ports. Of these, 20 handle the vast majority of container cargo, and only 2 U.S. ports are in the top 20 ports globally, while China has 7 of the top 10. This is not due to the lack of maritime activity in the U.S. It is because China heavily subsidizes port and maritime operations while the U.S. does not. During the supply chain crisis in 2021, the Biden administration mobilized funding to increase capacity and productivity. These efforts by the Biden administration, coupled with the hard work of longshore workers and many others in maritime, pulled us out of the supply chain crisis. Since then, over $2.18 billion in Port Infrastructure Development Program funding has gone to ports across the country to bolster safety and reliability. Ports like Houston, Texas received $25 million. Bay St. Louis, Mississippi received $4 million. The state of Alaska has received over $50 million for uses across the entire state just in fiscal year 24 alone. These states are benefiting from the bipartisan infrastructure law. Let's keep it going. And I want to mention the Clean Ports program that the Environmental Protection Agency administers and has assisted in the deployment of shore power to ports across the country, including a $63 million grant to the Port of Anacortes in my own district, which includes not just bringing shore power, but a total redevelopment of wholly underutilized area of the Port of Anacortes to create jobs and bring private sector jobs there, including having a signed grant agreement that now the EPA has inexplicably paused and is delaying the creation of these private sector jobs. This is inexplicable, and I ask the EPA to provide an explanation of what it is doing to get this grant going again, as well as the ones that are going to the Port of Bellingham, also in my district, and any other port that is expecting these grants from a signed grant agreement. Investing in shore power not only improves air quality and reduces pollution, it's consistent with standard operations at ports around the globe. Shipping companies want to cut pollution, ports want to be competitive. Rescinding funding for ports that were passed as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act puts our ports at a disadvantage. It is short-sighted, and we will not go quietly letting this happen. America's shipyards are an essential piece of maritime infrastructure that are falling behind due to this international competition, due to unfair and subsidized competition. Larger shipyards have no dedicated grant program and rely heavily on government and commercial contracts to stay afloat. Buy America requirements in the Jones Act help ensure shipyards maintain steady business by requiring shipbuilding and manufacturing to take place in the U.S. And I was heartened to hear Secretary Duffy's support for the Jones Act during his confirmation hearing. The Jones Act has strong support among members of this committee. It's critical to the maritime industry. But thanks to the historic levels of federal investment, this nation's transportation system and its infrastructure are better today than they were 4 years ago. Continuing this progress requires ongoing investment, especially in the maritime industry. Let's keep it going. Thank you. I yield back.